It's a real treat to be with you. This coalition has really already made a difference. And you can feel reverberations on the Hill, not only today, but from your previous work. And we're determined that we're going to get some legislation passed to close some of these outrageous, egregious, unjustified tax loopholes, and to get some transparency as well for corporations. And I can only assure you that if and when that happens, and I will say when that happens, that it will be in significant measure because we have the outside support of the people in this coalition. I very much appreciate, Lloyd, your comments about me and your leadership. There are people in the House of Representatives who spell Lloyd's last name D-O-G-G-E-D. Leave off the T's and put in the D instead, because he is a dogged soul, a great representative from Texas. My brother comments about that all the time. I have a congressman brother who, by the way, please remember, is an older brother when you see him. And if you have any trouble lobbying him, please let me know that as well. If there's any resistance at all in his office, I want to know about it. Lloyd said that they're passing all their post office bills in the House. That's one of the differences between the House and the Senate. You can't even get the post office bills passed in the U.S. Senate. It takes 60 votes for everything, including the post office is named after one's mother. The legislation that has been introduced, both on the accountability and the transparency legislation, and we're very grateful, by the way, to Senator Grassley for his support of the legislation that would bring transparency finally to corporations. We require more information when people get out, when people take a driver's license test than we do for people who are forming corporations. Even bank accounts require beneficial ownership to be described, but not corporations. The resistance that we've received from the secretaries of state has not yet been overcome. It's unbelievable to me that they even raised the objection, because it's such a minor issue, frankly, to ask when someone's incorporating for the names of the beneficial owners. But nonetheless, despite huge support from the law enforcement community, all parts of the law enforcement community, in support of our legislation for transparency for the reasons that you've already heard, nonetheless, we've not been able to get that over the goal line. And so I do hope that when you get to Senator Leahy's office, for instance, that you put in a good word for passage of this legislation. I know that Senator Grassley on the other side, as ranking member, is very supportive of it, but a good word with Senator Leahy will help. And thank you also, Lloyd, for mentioning my staff. Elise Bean and her colleagues have made an amazing contribution to tax fairness in this country. We have tax avoidance schemes and tax avoidance techniques which are really totally egregious. Where the loopholes exist, we can and should close them, and we're determined to close them. And where the loopholes don't exist, but they are imagined by taxpayers, we're determined to hold those taxpayers, would-be taxpayers, accountable, or should-be taxpayers, I would say, accountable for failure to pay taxes. And some of these loopholes are pretty dubious, I must say. And we pointed out some of the dubious tax law, including that one with Hewlett-Packard that was referred to. But without going into a lot of detail on the legislation, and many of you are familiar with it, we've had what we call a cut unjustified tax loophole bill, or cut loopholes bill. A number of other bills have already been introduced, going through the many loopholes which have been either used or imagined or created in order to avoid paying taxes. The point is very, very pungent that when some of the wealthiest corporations and most profitable corporations and wealthy individuals don't pay their taxes, that burden has got to be shouldered by the rest of us, by small businesses or even large businesses that pay their taxes, that can't ship their intellectual property to the Caymans or wherever. And who can't avoid taxes in the other ways that some of our largest corporations have found available to them. That one study, which I quote all the time, that kind of says it all, with 30 of our largest corporations, in 2 years that were looked at, with $130 billion in profits, paid nothing in taxes. That burden is shifted. And as a result of that, we find cuts in everything from Head Start to the Center for Disease Control that continue. And many, many more reductions, by the way, that we cannot afford as a people. Education programs, environmental programs, healthcare programs, you keep going, law enforcement programs, even defense programs. I'm chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and I've seen some things done there, which I think will weaken our country. And so the revenue that is lost is revenue that is needed. The deficits continue to exist, and the existence of those deficits drive us to deficit reduction measures such as sequestration, which are irrational and which do severe damage to this country. So I want to, again, thank you for all that you're doing. These two issues which you are focused on are, interestingly enough, related. You have talked about both accountability and transparency. On one, we are struggling very, very hard to bring about, and that's accountability. But when we talk about this, and when we point out the way in which, for instance, one Swiss bank gives 22,000 Americans the opportunity to hide their bank account, what we're told by the overseas banks and the others when we go after overseas people is, hey, wait a minute, you guys have a big hole also in your laws. You have a big hole because you don't require beneficial ownership to be described when people are creating corporations. And that is viewed, and I think accurately so, as a measure of inconsistency. Because many of the countries that are some of the worst when it comes to accountability, including the tax havens, are better when it comes to transparency, which is the ownership of corporations. And so we're put in a position, when we go after the tax havens, for instance, of the argument coming back to us, you guys should clean up your own act as well. And by God, we should. And that's where the transparency comes in. So let me end with a thank you. We have a new chairman, by the way, the Finance Committee, and that could make a difference because I think Ron Wyden is very open to some of these changes to close some of these egregious, unjustified tax loopholes, and that represents an opening as well. So thank you for all you're doing and will do. I think that there's going to be, I know there's going to be greater interest in these bills, this legislation, both on the accountability and the transparency side. I know it's going to happen because of discussions which we've had among Democrats. Hopefully we can pick up a Republican or two, by the way, on some of our tax loophole legislation. And for any one of you that bags a Republican, tell Chuck I said this too. You'll get a special place in heaven. We've got Senator Grassley totally committed on the transparency side, and we're very grateful to him. He really has been a gutsy senator, so I want to join in the accolades for him. He's been independent and calls them as he sees them, and I know you do too. Thanks for the great help, the great support that you provide. We're going to, I believe, actually be able to accomplish some of these reforms, some of these changes, some of these loophole closings to end these tax avoidance schemes this year. I hope to do it before I'm done, obviously, but the kind of work and effort you're putting in will make a huge difference. Thanks again, and we will take off if that's allowed at this point. Turn it over to your panel. Thanks so much.